Have you ever reflected deeply on a verse and felt your heart and mind shift from tension to calm? I want you to take a moment and comment below, sharing the scripture that brings you peace, because your testimony could remind someone else of God's faithfulness. Gratitude is another conduit for God's peace. When we focus on what we have rather than what we lack, when we thank God for the blessings in our lives, the peace of God flows more freely. Gratitude reorients our hearts, shifts our perspective, and clears the clutter of worry and fear that often block peace. It is remarkable how simply acknowledging God's goodness can dissolve anxiety and quiet a restless mind. Ask yourself, am I counting my blessings or my burdens today? And I invite you to write your answer in the comments, because reflection transforms understanding into action. Beloved, God's peace is not only for our comfort, it is for our protection. Just as a fortress shields a city from invading forces, God's peace shields our hearts and minds from the assault of worry, fear, and negativity. When we anchor ourselves in His presence, we are less reactive to external pressures, less swayed by fear-driven decisions, and more resilient in the face of trials. This peace does not remove challenges, but it equips us to face them with clarity, wisdom, and calm assurance. Let me remind you that peace is intimately connected to trust. To experience God's peace, you must trust Him fully. Trust is not blind. It is informed by experience, by scripture, by faith, and by the consistent faithfulness of God. Reflect on moments in your life when God has been faithful. Recall the times when challenges were overcome, when prayers were answered, when guidance was provided, when protection was evident. These memories reinforce trust, and trust opens the door for God's peace to flow into every area of your life. Ask yourself, do I trust God completely with this situation? And type your honest answer in the comments, because God honors transparency and invites us into deeper peace through acknowledgement of our dependence on Him. Sometimes God's peace comes through the simple act of letting go of control, letting go of expectations, letting go of the need to understand everything. When you release the illusion of control, you make space for divine orchestration. Imagine a bird in flight, effortlessly gliding, trusting the wind to carry it, trusting the air to support it. That is how God intends for your heart to move through life. Every worry released, every anxious thought surrendered, every fear relinquished, allows your spirit to soar in His peace. Community also plays a role in cultivating this peace. Sharing your burdens with trusted friends, mentors, or spiritual leaders allows for prayer, encouragement, and perspective. When someone prays with you and affirms God's promises over your life, your mind begins to internalize that peace. We were not created to carry life's burdens alone. God's peace often flows more tangibly when shared and affirmed among believers. Reflect for a moment. Who could you invite into your journey toward peace today? And share that person in the comments as a declaration of your intention to cultivate God's peace together. Daily practices reinforce peace. Setting aside time each morning to center yourself in God's presence, journaling your thoughts, meditating on His promises, breathing consciously, and engaging in prayer all contribute to a mind and heart grounded in serenity. Life's demands may be relentless, but consistency in spiritual discipline creates a foundation that fear cannot shake, worry cannot penetrate, and anxiety cannot dismantle. Ask yourself, am I consistent in my daily practices to invite God's peace, or do I allow distractions to dominate? Comment your reflection so we can learn and encourage one another. Music, silence, and solitude can also become vessels for God's peace. Slowing down, removing external distractions, and allowing moments of quiet to envelop your spirit helps you reconnect with His presence. Sometimes the world is so loud that the gentle voice of God cannot be heard. Creating intentional spaces of stillness clears the mind, calms the heart, and opens the soul to the tranquility that surpasses understanding. Have you allowed silence to teach you God's peace, or do you run constantly from quiet moments? Comment your experience below because someone needs your insight. Even in the midst of trials, God's peace can be a tangible presence. Imagine facing a situation that seems impossible, overwhelming, or frightening. Instead of panic, anxiety, or despair, you sense a calm assurance. Your mind is clear, your heart is steady, your spirit is anchored. This is not wishful thinking. This is divine intervention. God's peace can enter even the darkest moments, illuminating clarity, offering guidance, and providing strength. Beloved, the beauty of God's peace is that it is available to every believer, every day, in every circumstance. You do not have to wait for the storm to pass. You do not have to wait for understanding to come. You do not have to wait for the world to make sense. The peace of God transcends logic, surpasses comprehension, and enters the heart in moments of surrender and faith. And the invitation is yours. Will you receive it today? Will you embrace it fully? Will you allow God to guard your heart and mind with this supernatural peace? Beloved, have you ever noticed how your mind can be filled with so many conflicting thoughts, so many swirling emotions, so many urgent demands that it feels impossible to find clarity? Chaos in the mind is one of the greatest obstacles to peace, one of the most persistent challenges in daily life, and yet there is a pathway from confusion to calm, a pathway that is rooted in the transformative power of prayer. Prayer is not just an activity or a ritual. Prayer is a spiritual discipline, a channel of divine connection, a lifeline that transforms the mind, the heart, and the soul. When you pray, you are engaging with the creator of the universe, the one who knows your thoughts before you even speak them, the one who has authority over every storm, every circumstance, and every situation in your life. Imagine your mind as a stormy sea, waves crashing in every direction, winds of fear and worry tossing you about, currents of doubt threatening to pull you under. This is how many of us navigate life when we attempt to manage our thoughts and circumstances solely with human effort. But prayer is the anchor in the storm. It steadies the ship. It calms the waters. It restores direction and stability. The moment you intentionally enter into prayer, you invite the presence of God into the chaos. And the supernatural effect is that your mind begins to settle. Thoughts no longer collide violently. Emotions no longer dictate your reactions. Clarity begins to emerge. Prayer is the key that unlocks the calm that already exists within God's presence. And it is accessible to every believer at any time. The first step in allowing prayer to transform your mind is intentionality. You must consciously choose to pause amidst the busyness, the noise, and the demands of life. So often we attempt to pray while distracted, while multitasking, while our minds are preoccupied with 1,000 other concerns. True transformative prayer requires focus. It requires turning off the noise, setting aside time, and entering a space of deliberate communion with God. Ask yourself, am I praying as a routine or am I praying as a transformative connection with God? This reflection is crucial because prayer is not merely about speaking words. It's about entering into alignment with God's will, receiving his perspective, and allowing his presence to renew your mind. When you pray with intentionality, you allow God to begin the work of reordering your thoughts. Thoughts that were tangled, chaotic, or overwhelming begin to take shape. Clarity arises where confusion once dominated. Perspectives shift where judgment and anxiety had clouded vision. Solutions that seemed impossible become visible. Opportunities that were hidden now appear in your line of sight. This is because prayer does more than ask for answers. It invites the Spirit of God to inhabit your mental space, to guide your reasoning, to align your thoughts with divine wisdom, and to replace mental chaos with calm assurance. Prayer also transforms the mind because it is an act of surrender. To pray effectively is to release control over outcomes, to acknowledge that God is sovereign, and to trust that his plans for your life are perfect. When you surrender in prayer, You are no longer struggling against the uncontrollable circumstances of life. You are no longer attempting to manipulate events or people in your own strength. Instead, you place your confidence in the one who holds the future, the one who orchestrates every detail, and the one who knows what is best for your life. Surrender in prayer dissolves tension, reduces stress, and allows your mind to rest in the assurance that you are not alone, that you are guided, and that you are protected. Have you noticed how often your mind replays past mistakes, dwells on regrets, or projects fears into the future? This is a form of mental chaos that prayer directly addresses. When you bring these thoughts before God in prayer, you are actively releasing them from the dominion they hold over your mind. You acknowledge them, you lay them down, and you invite God to replace them with His perspective. In prayer, regrets are met with grace. Fears are met with courage, and uncertainties are met with divine guidance. The mind, once a battlefield of conflicting thoughts, begins to become a sanctuary of calm reflection and clarity. Meditation within prayer is another transformative practice. It is not enough to speak words. Allow space for the Spirit to respond, to guide, and to reveal insight. Sit quietly after prayer and reflect on God's presence, on His promises, and on His faithfulness. Listen for impressions, for convictions, for clarity that rises from the Spirit rather than the flesh. This reflective practice trains the mind to shift from reactive patterns to receptive patterns. Thoughts are no longer dominated by fear, doubt, or impatience. Instead, they are aligned with wisdom, discernment, and understanding that can only come from God. Journaling during prayer is also a powerful tool to transform your mind. Write down the thoughts, feelings, and requests you bring to God. Then write any impressions, insights, or revelations you receive in response. The physical act of recording allows the mind to release mental clutter, organizes your thoughts, and reinforces understanding. You can see patterns, identify areas where you need growth, and recognize ways in which God is actively responding. Journaling creates a tangible record of transformation, a roadmap that traces the journey from chaos to calm. Prayer also has a physiological impact on the mind. Studies have shown that intentional prayer reduces stress hormones, lowers blood pressure, and induces a sense of mental relaxation. When combined with spiritual faith, these physiological benefits create a powerful synergy that transforms thought patterns, reduces anxiety, and fosters clarity. Every breath taken in focused prayer, every exhalation releasing worry or tension, reinforces the calm that God desires for your mind. It is a holistic practice that engages spirit, mind, and body in alignment with divine peace. Repetition and consistency in prayer are crucial. Transformation does not happen in a single session. It is cultivated over time through daily commitment, through persistent seeking of God's presence, and through conscious practice. Each prayer session builds momentum, strengthens faith, and creates neural pathways in the mind that favor calm, clarity, and divine alignment. Chaos loses its grip not because life becomes easier, but because the mind becomes trained to enter into God's presence consistently, allowing His Spirit to reorder thoughts, redirect focus, and infuse peace. Beloved, reflection is another essential component of transformative prayer. After you pray, take a moment to observe your mental state. Notice shifts in thought patterns, emotional responses, and clarity of mind. Compare these moments to times when you neglect intentional prayer. Reflection builds awareness and reinforces the understanding that prayer is not passive. It is an active force that shapes your cognitive and spiritual landscape. Ask yourself, how has my mind shifted since I began this practice of prayer? And I encourage you to answer this in the comments, because sharing your insight reinforces understanding and inspires others to embrace prayer as a transformative discipline. Visualization in prayer is equally powerful. Imagine God's presence as a warm, calming light entering your mind, dissolving confusion, clearing cluttered thoughts and illuminating wisdom. Picture the chaos of worry and fear melting away, replaced by clarity, calm, and divine assurance. Visualization strengthens the connection between your mental imagery and spiritual reality, reinforcing the transformation of the mind from chaos to calm. Community prayer further amplifies the effect. When you join with others in prayer, your mind becomes aligned with collective faith, collective focus, and collective surrender. The atmosphere of prayer and unity releases mental tension, heightens spiritual awareness, and reinforces clarity. God's peace moves powerfully through the combined intention of believers, transforming minds and hearts in ways that solitary effort may not achieve. Ask yourself, who can I join in prayer with this week to strengthen my mind and spirit? Type your reflection in the comments and make a commitment to action. Silence within prayer is transformative as well. After bringing your requests, burdens, and concerns to God, allow moments of quiet. In the stillness, your mind can absorb divine impressions, insights, and direction. It is in the silence that clarity emerges, where mental chaos is replaced by divine order, where the noise of the world is overshadowed by the presence of God. Cultivating silence in prayer trains the mind to pause, to reflect, and to receive rather than constantly react or seek control. Music, scripture, and spoken affirmations can also accompany prayer to enhance transformation. Singing psalms, repeating affirmations of God's promises, or meditating on verses such as "Be still and know that I am God" help embed peace deeply into the mind. These practices reinforce the calming effect of prayer and ensure that the mind retains focus on divine truths rather than on fears, doubts, or confusion. Forgiveness in prayer is a critical factor for transforming the mind. Carrying resentment, anger, or bitterness fuels mental chaos. When you bring these feelings into prayer, asking God for the grace to forgive and to release, the mind experiences profound relief. Emotional and mental burdens dissolve, and the space previously occupied by turmoil is now available for clarity, peace, and divine insight. Prayer also cultivates patience and endurance in the mind. Often chaos arises from impatience, wanting immediate resolution, expecting instant answers, or fearing delayed outcomes. Prayer shifts the focus from human timing to divine timing, teaching the mind to rest, to wait, and to trust. With consistent practice, the mind learns that peace is not contingent on speed, but on alignment with God's will. Beloved, every time you pray, you are entering a sacred laboratory where the mind is reshaped. Confusion gives way to clarity. Stress yields to calm. And the turbulent currents of thought are reordered by divine influence. Your thoughts begin to flow in harmony with God's perspective. Your emotions stabilize and your actions align with divine wisdom. Prayer is not a passive ritual. It is a dynamic, transformative practice that renews the mind daily, preparing you to navigate life with serenity, clarity, and confidence. Beloved, today I want you to reflect deeply on the power of surrender and how it transforms your life, your mind, and your heart. Surrender is not a sign of weakness, and it is not a step back from responsibility. Surrender is a conscious decision to release control, to trust in God's sovereignty, and to allow His perfect will to guide your thoughts, emotions, and actions. Daily surrender is an intentional practice, a spiritual discipline that cultivates peace, clarity, and stability. Many of us struggle because we cling to control, believing that if we hold tightly enough to outcomes, plans, or relationships, we can ensure life unfolds according to our expectations. Yet in reality, this grasping creates tension, fear, anxiety, and restless minds. It is only through surrender that we experience the fullness of God's peace, the calm that surpasses understanding, and the quiet assurance that He is working all things together for our good. Consider the nature of surrender. Surrender begins with awareness. Awareness that life cannot always be controlled, that people cannot always behave as we desire, that circumstances will change unpredictably, and that outcomes may not always align with our plans. Awareness allows the heart to pause and to acknowledge that God is greater than any situation, wiser than any human strategy, and more faithful than any human effort. When you consciously recognize your limitations and the omnipotence of God, surrender becomes a natural response, not a forced act. It is the choice to release the tension that comes from attempting to manipulate life with your own strength and to embrace the guidance, protection, and wisdom of God. Daily surrender is a practice. It is not a single moment of yielding, but a continual alignment of your thoughts, your emotions, and your decisions with God's will. Each morning as you rise, you can choose to surrender the day to Him. Each challenge that appears can be met with a moment of surrender rather than a reaction of control. Each interaction, each decision, and each concern can be offered up as an opportunity to practice trust. Ask yourself this reflective question. Am I consciously surrendering this day to God, or am I attempting to manage it alone? This question is vital because surrender requires recognition, intention, and consistency. The benefits of daily surrender are profound. When you practice surrender, your mind experiences a reduction in stress. The constant need to anticipate, control, or manage outcomes diminishes. Anxiety that once dominated your thoughts begins to loosen its grip. Fear that fueled hesitation starts to fade. Your heart begins to experience a steady rhythm of trust, and your spirit moves into alignment with divine assurance. Surrender is not about ignoring responsibility. It is about approaching responsibility with divine partnership rather than solitary struggle. One of the most powerful aspects of surrender is its effect on decision making. When we operate from a place of control, our decisions are often clouded by fear, uncertainty, and limited perspective. But when we surrender, we invite God's wisdom into the process. Choices that once seemed confusing become clear. Paths that once appeared obstructed open with divine timing. Surrender allows us to act from a place of clarity rather than panic, from a place of peace rather than pressure, and from a place of faith rather than fear. Consider your current decisions. Are you approaching them with tension and worry, or with trust and surrender? Pause and reflect on this. Surrender is intimately connected to trust. Trust is the foundation upon which surrender rests. You cannot truly surrender to God without trusting His character, His promises, and His timing. Trust requires the mind to release skepticism, the heart to release doubt, and the spirit to release fear. Trust is cultivated through reflection on God's faithfulness, prayerful connection, meditation on Scripture, and recollection of past victories and guidance. When trust grows, surrender becomes effortless because the mind, heart, and spirit are aligned with God's perspective. Prayer is a critical tool for cultivating surrender. In prayer, you lay down your desires, your plans, your fears, and your burdens before God. You speak openly, honestly, and vulnerably, acknowledging that His will is higher than your understanding and that His plans are perfect. Prayer allows surrender to move from a conceptual idea to a lived experience. When you pray consistently, surrender becomes integrated into your daily life. Your mind begins to release obsessive control, your heart begins to soften in trust, and your spirit becomes receptive to divine guidance. Reflection is also a vital part of surrender. At the end of each day, pause and examine where you held tightly and where you released. Recognize moments of tension where you attempted to control outcomes and compare them to moments of surrender where you allowed God's presence to guide. Reflection builds awareness and reinforces the understanding that surrender is not a one-time act, but a continual practice. Ask yourself, where did I need to surrender today? And where did I succeed in doing so? Document these reflections, for they provide a record of growth and insight that strengthens spiritual discipline. Scripture teaches us the importance of surrender through countless examples. Consider Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane praying, "Not my will, but yours be done." Even in moments of intense pressure, uncertainty, and impending challenge, Jesus surrendered his desires to align with God's plan. This example shows us that surrender does not negate courage, purpose, or action. It integrates them with divine wisdom and guidance. Like Jesus, our surrender is an act of faith, an act of courage, and an act of alignment with God's will. Visualization can also support the practice of surrender. Imagine yourself holding a heavy burden, a weight that represents fear, worry, control, or anxiety. Visualize placing this burden into the hands of God, seeing it lifted effortlessly, and feeling the lightness, freedom, and calm that follows. Visualization strengthens the mind-body-spirit connection and reinforces the reality that surrender is not passive, but liberating, transforming, and deeply peaceful. Daily surrender also transforms relationships. When we attempt to control others, demand specific responses, or impose expectations, tension and conflict arise. But when we surrender, we allow God to work through relationships, bringing clarity, patience, and understanding. Surrender fosters empathy, reduces conflict, and allows interactions to unfold under divine guidance rather than human insistence. Consider your relationships. Are you controlling, or are you surrendering to God's hand in guiding these connections? Gratitude is deeply intertwined with surrender. When you practice daily surrender, you notice the blessings, guidance, and opportunities that arise as a result of divine orchestration. Gratitude reinforces trust and strengthens surrender, creating a feedback loop that deepens peace. Recognizing God's provision, protection, and guidance allows your mind to rest, your heart to trust, and your spirit to flourish. Consistency in surrender is essential. Life constantly presents new challenges, unexpected twists, and evolving circumstances. Surrender is not a single moment. It is a lifestyle. Daily recommitment to trust, prayer, reflection, and release ensures that peace is not occasional, but habitual. Over time, surrender becomes second nature, an automatic response to stress, uncertainty, or challenge. Your mind remains steady, your heart remains confident, and your spirit remains anchored regardless of external circumstances. Forgiveness is another aspect of surrender. Holding on to resentment, anger, or bitterness keeps the mind in a state of tension. When we forgive, we release ourselves and others from the grip of past wrongs. Prayerful surrender combined with forgiveness transforms the mind from chaos to calm, from restlessness to stability, and from resentment to peace. Daily practice of surrender includes regular reflection on where forgiveness is needed, releasing the burden to God, and trusting Him to restore justice and peace. Community prayer and accountability can amplify surrender. Sharing burdens with trusted spiritual companions allows for mutual encouragement, affirmation, and guidance. When you verbalize surrender and invite prayer from others, your mind, heart, and spirit receive reinforcement. Community supports the habit of surrender, reminds us of God's faithfulness, and models consistency in trusting His hand. Consider, who could you engage with in prayer this week to strengthen your practice of surrender? Silence and meditation enhance surrender as well. Taking intentional moments to pause, breathe, and reflect in God's presence allows the mind to release clutter, the heart to soften, and the spirit to receive guidance. Silence creates space for divine impressions, clarity, and insight that often cannot be perceived in noise or distraction. Daily moments of stillness integrate surrender into the rhythm of life, establishing calm as a natural state rather than a temporary escape. Affirmations and declarations of surrender are also transformative. Speaking aloud or internally, I release control. I trust God's timing. I surrender the situation. I choose His will over mine, reinforces the mind's focus on divine alignment. Words carry power. When paired with intention, repetition, and faith, they rewire thought patterns, cultivate calm, and deepen peace. These affirmations are reminders that surrender is not resignation, but deliberate alignment with God's will. Daily surrender transforms perspective. Situations that once caused frustration, anxiety, or despair are now seen through the lens of trust, faith, and divine orchestration. Challenges become opportunities for growth, setbacks become lessons in patience, and uncertainties become invitations to deepen reliance on God. The mind shifts from reactive to reflective, from anxious to assured, and from controlled to confident. Beloved, surrender also impacts physical and emotional well-being. Releasing tension, anxiety, and worry into God's hands reduces stress, supports emotional resilience, and cultivates mental clarity. The practice of surrender creates an internal environment where peace can thrive, creativity can flourish, and spiritual discernment can expand. Daily surrender is an investment in holistic well-being that touches mind, heart, and body. Surrender is ultimately an act of love. Love for God, love for yourself, and love for the people around you. It acknowledges that God's wisdom exceeds human understanding, that his timing surpasses human planning, and that his perspective encompasses what our eyes cannot see. Love is expressed in surrender because it demonstrates trust, patience, humility, and faithfulness. Daily surrender deepens the capacity for love in thought, word, and deed. When surrender becomes a habit, it transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Every decision, every interaction, every challenge, every triumph becomes an opportunity to practice trust, align with God's will, and experience peace that surpasses understanding. Life's chaos no longer dominates your mind. Life's uncertainty no longer overwhelm your heart. Daily surrender establishes a rhythm of divine partnership, aligning human effort with heavenly guidance, producing calm, clarity, and joy that cannot be shaken.